Welcome back to another episode of Healing Conversations with Jessica Ella. I'm your host, Jessica Ella. I am Australia's leading women's trauma therapist and founder of Aruka Therapy. And today we're going to be talking about memory. And I've done a couple of episodes on traumatic memory and on how to process memories, but I want to just speak more broadly and personally to the subject today for those of you who either work with your clients' traumatic memories or you're one of the therapists who avoids the memories at all costs. I want to just give you some deeper understanding today around what it is, how it works, and how to work with it so that we can get a little bit more confidence in being able to actually process it for our clients. Because what I find is that when we avoid processing the memory, there is this unconscious narrative or message that is being received by the client that says this is too much. And I've even actually had clients come to me who've had therapists say to them, but I don't advise you to go back into that trauma. I don't advise you to work on that memory because I think it's going to be too much for your system. It's going to overwhelm you. I don't think that we actually need to go there. And in my personal opinion, this actually comes from a lack of skill and a lack of tools to be able to do that. So it's actually the therapist's gap that's causing the client to not go back into the memory, but also to therefore become more and more afraid of accessing it. Because if somebody who is in a position where they're the person that should be able to help us, they're the person, especially if you're going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist that's saying to you, I don't think you can handle that, let's not go back into that. That's telling your subconscious mind, this memory is absolutely not safe to unlock. Memory is not safe to revisit. And it actually gives it even more charge. And over time, the more therapists that we have that tell us that we shouldn't go into it, and the more times that we continue to have these flashbacks and have these, have nightmares about it or have it pop into our mind, we get more and more afraid of it. And there's a lot of people that say, we need to be careful with re-traumatization when going back into the memories, when in actual fact, we're traumatizing people by telling them that it's too much and by not knowing how to go into it and process it correctly. So I'm going to rewind a little bit because memory is such a fickle thing. We have different types of memory, and our memory can change over time. And so one of the things that I get asked a lot by my clients and by people on social media is, how do I know if a memory is real? How do I know if this traumatic memory that keeps popping up in my mind is actually real, or whether it's just my imagination, or how do I know if that's exactly what happened? Especially when what's happening to them or what's happening to them in the traumatic memory is happening with another person. Because let's be honest, most trauma is relational trauma. Most trauma is in relation to other people and the way that other people are treating us, things that they're doing to us. And so they're afraid generally of the memory being incorrect and what the repercussions of that memory being incorrect could be. So what I like to say to people, especially therapists, for those of you who are healers, coaches, therapists, psychologists, whatever you are, I always say to people, when we're working with memory, finding out whether the memory is true or real is not the goal. And for your client, it might be. For your client, they might be like, how do I know if it's real? Can you tell me if it's real? Do you think it's real? Does it sound real? They're going to be coming in with these questions coming from a place of fear. What we need to remind them first is that they don't have to do anything with this memory. So often people will be avoidant or afraid of processing a memory because they're afraid of what, like I said before, what's going to happen as a result of me remembering this. The thing is, we have complete control. If we remember it and it is exactly as we remember it, we don't have to do anything with it. And I often explain to my clients, once we process it, you're less and less likely to want to actually, act on whatever's happened, because it's going to lose its charge and it's going to lose that, the emotions around it. So uncovering or trying to find whether a memory is true or real is not the goal. The goal is to process it correctly so that it no longer has an effect on their lives. But it's really interesting because a lot of memories that people do have aren't necessarily real. And what I've actually found this very recently with my children. It really challenged my perception of memory. I remember watching a documentary years ago saying that memory is adaptive and memory changes at different times, like when we access it, depending on the state that we're in, the people that we're around, other people's opinions of what happened. You might be with your siblings and say, yeah, I remember that day we went here and this happened. And all of a sudden they're saying, no, that's not what happened. This is what happened. That can change your memory. And next time you recall it, it can actually be closer to what they said. And so our perception and our state when accessing and remembering the memory actually does have an effect on the memory. So like I said, I've recently noticed this with my children. So I always had this idea that memory was just memory and that what you remember is what happened. And lately my children will tell me a story and they'll be like, yeah, Mum, remember last weekend when this happened and that happened? And they will both have an argument over how it happened because they would have perceived what happened so differently. And half the time, both of them are wrong. Half the time they've taken something that happened a month ago and it's come together with this story that they're telling, and they've pieced together different pieces of information to form a memory. And when we're thinking about like working with, it gets really complicated when you start to realize this, because you realize that our perception, our state, the state of our nervous system and the emotions that we're experiencing at the time is going to affect the way that the memory is stored. Now, this is not new information. I teach this to my students all the time. When the state that we're in, the emotion that we're feeling, and the thoughts that we have about what's happening will create the belief, and that will affect how the memory is stored. But what this means is that when people tell you that their perception is that they've come from this toxic home environment, this abusive home environment, and there's other people in the family that say that they had a great experience, sometimes this can be something as simple as the state of their nervous system or other factors or other things that were happening in their life that have skewed this memory in this moment to make them feel that it was the way that it was. And when we think about it, I've been thinking about it a lot with my children lately, because there's been some times where my youngest son has told me a story and I know that that's not how it happened, but because I know that that's how he's stored it, that's the only thing that matters. And this is the only thing that should matter with your clients. It doesn't actually matter whether from your perception, someone else's version of events is real or true. All that matters is that it feels real and true for them, and we have to process what's real and true for them. So this goes for, and like this is why the type of therapy that I teach works really well with psychosis and with people with schizophrenia, because it's like whether it's real or not real doesn't even really matter in the beginning at all. All that matters is that you don't feel that way anymore. All that matters is that you think that whatever that thing is that's happened has passed, and that it's not looping, and that it's you're currently still experiencing it. So if we start to think of not so much finding the truth in things, and this is where it can be really difficult for clients. They want to find the truth about their childhood, the truth about their experiences, the truth like about, they'll ask their siblings, they'll ask other family members, what was it like? Do you remember this? Do you remember that? Trying to piece together this puzzle, when what really matters is how they felt, and what really matters is what they believe to be true as a result of the memories that they have stored. So thinking about the fact that any memory that we hold that we can easily recall as a negative memory or a traumatic memory holds within it a subconscious belief about who we are, an emotion that didn't get to be expressed, and a level of confusion around what is happening. That's generally what the recipe for a traumatic moment. And so whether it's true, whether it's real, whatever happened, I'm constantly explaining to my clients, all that matters is that you remember it the way that you remember it, and that we process it the way that you remember it. Because actually sometimes them thinking, halfway through session saying, I'm not sure if that's actually what happened though, and my sister said that this is what happened, and I think maybe this is what happened, and they're questioning it, that's actually sometimes a form of protection, stopping them from actually having to continue to process the actual memory. So we want to be always looking at things from their point of view. And if our clients are, going down these rabbit holes of like, oh, but, Mum said that it didn't happen like this, or Mum said that she felt like this, or it only happened because of this, but all I noticed was XYZ, that's all we need to be focusing on. So in order to actually correctly process a memory, we need to be finding the emotion that didn't get to be felt. We need to be allowing our clients to somatically move through that emotion. So when I say somatically, I mean within the body. The body needs to be able to move in the way that it wasn't able to move, and it needs to say the words that it wasn't able to say or make the sounds it wasn't able to make. This is how we get the body involved. And this is where implicit and explicit memory come into play. A lot of people talk about memory being something that is like memory is memory and, somatics is somatics. But in actual fact, memory and somatics, it all blends in together. Implicit and explicit memory are very much linked. You can have the narrative memory, you can have the visual memory, you can see, flashbacks, you can remember vividly what happened. But actually, implicit memory is what your body remembers. It's the way that your body remembers how to move. And so we constantly need to be tying these two things together. And if we're only ever visually processing the memories and we're not processing it within the body, then there's a disconnect in actually fully, completely processing that memory. So for me, that recipe is somatically experiencing it, allowing their body to get involved, allowing their body to release in the way that it needs to release. But they need to be in their subconscious. They need to be in a deep theta brainwave so that they can access it visually and they can process it visually. Now, this is the part that everybody misses, is having them in the correct brainwave, but allowing them to get their body involved. It's really just that simple when we're talking memory processing. A lot of the time, if your clients are coming back with the same memory, you haven't processed it correctly. And the reason that clients come back with the same memory over and over is because they're talking about it, but talking about a memory doesn't process it. It just doesn't, especially when it comes to trauma. Talking about something that's recently happened absolutely can help you process it. You've had a fight with your partner, you go to your psychologist and you talk about it. This is what happened and this is how I got triggered, and you work through it and you come up with some tools to not have that fight next time, or to be able to regulate yourself, to be able to speak your needs, whatever it is, you can workshop that current situation. That's because it's fresh and it's readily available, and it's great for you to be able to talk through those things. But talking through something that happened in the past doesn't change what happened in the past. What actually changes what happened in the past is going back and processing it. Because your brain, when you go back to access a processed memory, it feels like you think the way that you were implanted to think. You feel the way that you were programmed to feel from that healing session. So what happens is, when I take my clients into a memory, for context, we only ever work on any traumatic memory once. If you're doing it correctly, you don't need to continuously be going back into the same memory. I haven't worked on the same memory with any clients twice, because once you process it, it's processed and it's done and it's complete. And the brain can know that was then and this is now. So that's tying together that explicit and implicit memory so that the body and the brain together can know. Because what I found was that I had clients who would visually process things and they would know logically that it happened in the past, but when they would think of it, they would still have the emotional reaction of it being in the present because their body hadn't processed it. So this is where we tie those two in together. But I have clients coming in, and the way that I know that they have processed it is that when they come back in 2 weeks later for their second session, I get them to revisit the memory, and I get them to say, when we think back and feel back into that memory now, how does it feel? And the way that they describe it to me without them being able to see their own notes is exactly what we implanted in the session prior. They say, I feel calm, I feel safe, I can see, my inner child in this place, they can see it, they can feel it the way that we have processed it. So the brain and the body has gotten involved, and now that memory no longer is on a loop. The way that I explain to people, a traumatic memory is basically an open wound. It's an open memory, an open moment where anytime we're reminded of something surrounding that memory, we get taken back, not sometimes literally by a flashback, but sometimes just by a body memory. Our body goes back into remembering, and our mind tries to figure out what's happening and why our body is going into panic and chaos, and it's trying to place it. And normally what it places it on the subconscious will pick up on things in our current environment, thinking, oh, it's because I'm late for work, or it's my boss, or it's this or that. But what we're placing it on is a similar narrative or feeling or subconscious belief as the initial moment, as the initial memory that hasn't been processed. And what's really interesting, again, about memory is that if you have an open wound or an open memory that hasn't been processed, when you access that memory and when you remember that memory subsequent times in the future, the state that you're currently in when you're accessing that memory can affect the memory. So I'll give you a personal example. I went through this period in time. Some of you who've been listening to the pod forever will know about this period of time. But I went through a period of time where I had an unprocessed memory or an incorrectly processed memory. And I was having a lot of panic. It was a intensely traumatic memory to do with torture, sadistic abuse, sexual abuse, and it hadn't been correctly processed. And what happened was I got in such a panicked state, in a constant panic state, like I'm talking multiple panic attacks every single day, that when I would start to remember, when I was having memories of just simple things that had happened in the past, the panic started to leach into those memories to the point where I couldn't think of anything that had happened in the past without me pairing the constant panic that I was currently feeling with these memories from the past. And so what happened is all of these memories that were quite insignificant, really, as I was starting to remember them, I was starting to remember them and pairing them with this panic. And all of a sudden I started to think, what if this has happened? What if that's happened? Why am I panicking in that memory? What's happening there? What am I missing? And I actually sent myself into, well, not sent myself. I mean, obviously there was a therapist involved that had done something wrong back at this time in my life, and it had sent me into a complete psychosis. And this was where I really did learn as well that it doesn't really matter, as I said, whether it's true or whether it's real. What matters is that you're processing how it feels. So I actually had to process those memories and process all of that panic in order to be able to remember that all of those other memories that were coming forward didn't have any panic attached to them. They were just simple, nothing memories, but my brain was like literally on fire, firing and wiring, pairing them all together. So the state that you're in when you access memories can change the memory, and you compare the current state with the memory. So we're constantly unconsciously accessing different memories and different moments and pairing them with the way that we're feeling. And we actually can start to collect more and more triggers surrounding this memory as well. For instance, you could have a memory where something bad had happened, and it was, your dad's friend who was a really tall man. And him and I'm just random example here off the top of my head, but him and your dad's friend and him got into a massive fight, and he was really aggressive, and maybe he hit your dad. And from this moment, your brain takes information of, I'm not safe, tall, and we look at the surroundings. Our brain goes tall man, and our brain goes tall man, not safe, men with beards, not safe, whatever it is. We collect, and our brain collects information based on what we're focusing on and noticing in that moment, but also, what we've been conditioned to pick up and notice and focus on. So what I might take from that event is a man with a beard. What my sister might notice is that he's really, really tall. And so I become hypervigilant around men with beards. She becomes hypervigilant around men who are really tall. But he might have also said some specific words. What can happen is later on in life, someone says something that triggers in your brain that memory without you even sometimes consciously remembering. And all of a sudden, when this new person says those words, that person might be wearing a green t-shirt, like something that fucking simple, a green t-shirt, and you get triggered and it reminds you of this memory, and all of a sudden your brain stacks into this open, unprocessed memory, green t-shirt, tall man, beard, green t-shirt, this certain smell, this certain thing. We start to pair and collect information, but we can actually start to stack information that isn't relevant to the initial memory, but it's like a tangent of it. And this is just how our brain is wired to keep us safe. It's like, oh, that feels familiar and similar. what other information about this person do I need to pick up and notice so that I can protect myself in future situations? Now, if you have clients that have hundreds of unprocessed open memories with multiple triggers in each memory, and each time they're accessing it and being triggered in relationships, in workplaces, in normal situations, and they're pairing that new information, you can start to understand how some people are just not coping. You can start to understand how some people are just triggered by everything when they're constantly, it's this stacking effect of triggers into these open wounds. Now, the ways that we can access the memory, whether they're consciously aware of it or not, the ways that we can start to access that is by using the triggers, because the triggers will very quickly get you to the place that you need to get to. Like if somebody is aware that there's a certain word or green t-shirts, or, I have had many in my life where there was the smell of cut grass was a trigger. And there's so many specific things that people say, I don't know why, but when I smell or see or hear or, this certain thing happens in my relationship, I just lose my shit. That's the entry point where we can go back into the memory. And again, it doesn't matter whether the memory has adapted over time and it's not exactly as it was, or they're not sure if it's real. What matters is that we're processing it based off their version of events and their perception. So if you're somebody who's listening as well, because I know that so many of you that listen who are therapists, healers, coaches, psychiatrists, psychologists, I know that you're listening because you're the type of person like me who also does a lot of your own deeper work. You actually are constantly working on yourself and working through your own things so that you can take your clients deeper and that you can give them the best result possible. I want you to remember this for yourself as well, because it's something that's really helped me, is that actually once you process it, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. All that matters is how you feel about it and how you feel about yourself as a result of processing it. So if you believed, that you were helpless and that you were a victim and that, no one was coming for you and that you were completely unsafe, and you can process that memory and now feel safe and powerful and confident and free, it really doesn't matter what happened, and it really doesn't matter whether it's true or real. The only time that it matters is when people were talking like my sort of life history and abuse, where we're wanting to have some sort of justice, or people are wanting some sort of justice. That's where things start to, obviously get important. I have lots of clients who we don't process memories because they're going through court and they actually want to be able to recall it as they remember it. But for the person who wants to heal and move forward, and if this is you, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you process it as you remember it. And don't because I've seen people spend years not processing something because they weren't sure if it was true and they didn't want to say it out loud unless they knew that it was true. That's just avoidance. We say what we think it is, and pretty quickly I've had memories where I'm like, I'm not really sure if this is real, but I'm just going to say it out loud. And as I've started to say it out loud, I've felt the emotion and I've felt it all, and I've seen it so much more clearly once I've been able to speak it out loud. So sometimes there is just an avoidance. We're just kind of convincing ourselves that we're not sure if it's real because we don't actually want to go back into it. And it's just a complete, another protective mechanism. So if you're somebody who doesn't feel confident processing memories, if you're somebody who feels like, you don't actually know how to guide them to correctly, fully process a memory so that it's closed off, filed away, they've purged the emotions, that, you've had that complete neurosomatic approach. If you're not sure how to do that, I do have a program that I've released recently called The Missing Link Between Brain, Body and Belief. It's literally $9.95 because I want everyone to have access to this information, and it's speaking you through the layers that you need to go through in order to actually connect the brain, the body, the beliefs, somatics, how we're actually going to rewire their brain. It's connecting all of that and how that relates to memory processing and actually correctly processing memory. So you'll find a link to that in the notes of this episode. And I want to thank you again for listening. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe on whichever platform you're listening on, and I'll see you in the next episode.